Hambini fans, and welcome to another episode of the Shite and Sarcasm Engineering Show. Today's episode, well, my Facebook, Instacrap and email all lit up about the subject of Thomas de Gendt, and his puncture, well, not his puncture, it was a bit more than that, it was a blowout on his hookless ZIPP rims. Now, this is the title of the presentation, Hookless. If you own a set of ZIPP wheels, look away right now. Now, further on in this show, I've gone and spent vast sums of money and taken a set of ZIPP 454s and chopped them up in the interest of sports engineering. If you actually even class that as a fucking term, sports engineering. Right, that's what these fuckers call it. We'd better just check the pen is working. The pen is working. Oh God, look at that handwriting. Me and my new pen. It's a Wacom. But, oh fuck's sake. Bye Hambini, age 5. Remember to look me up on Instacrap and Facebook and Patreon. In fact, if you're on Patreon, you get some discounts off the website. Right. First of all, copyrights. If you own a picture and you want the credit, then, you know, do get in touch and I'll put a credit in the box below. I only give credits to people with decent sized pens. And I'm an idiot from YouTube, so don't believe anything I say. Make sure you listen to those journalists who suck off marketing men from the various bicycling companies. And I'm saying men because I've never seen a marketing lady, girl, chick, non-binary, hexadecimal, whatever the fuck it's called these days, in my entire lifetime in the bike industry. Right, joking aside, this is the ZIPP 454, which Thomas de Gendt was riding along on, and then it blew up. Right, where's the fucking eraser? Oh, yes. Right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking what that is. Well, that's milk. Right, inside we had, well, it was a ZIPP hookless wheel, and then they'd put on a brand of tyres. I think they were Vittoria. Someone somewhere said they were Continental. They don't look like Continental to me. I thought they were Victoria, but I know, that's by the by. If anyone has, I mean, he's got a GoPro on there. If anyone has footage of the incident, then do get in touch. He's also got some regulation UCI angle on his STI levers. So his sexually transmitted infection levers are angled inwards at the correct angle. I mean, on a more serious note, I mean, this could have ended up like with a big trip to hospital, especially if you were like coming downhill at high speed, then yeah, you'd be bollocks. So here we've got two rims. I've got the one that is of contention, which is this one on the right, which is a ZIPP. I think it's a 454. Not quite sure. We're not really here for that anyway. And this, which is a Windspace Hyper Lun. This one is hooked. This one is not. It's hookless. Before I go any further, let's just have a look at the rest of this grade A ZIPP rim. So that's the cutout of the insides of it. I would draw your attention to a few little features. So there's obviously the bit at the back, and then there's the discontinuity here in the carbon layer, which I'm going to save for another video because we're not here to ream the fuck out of that one just yet. Anyway, so we go back to this. Now, I got these two rims because they were roughly the same size. So they're about 55, 56 millimeters, something like that. This one obviously varies a bit because it's the sawtooth variety. Now, if you look at them, the most obvious difference, apart if you forget the rim shape, because this one's a bit blunter than the ZIPP, is the hook. Now, the hook and the rest of the sort of tyre containing area on the Windspace is considerably thicker than it is on the ZIPP. The other thing that is more difficult to explain is the stiffness. And what I don't mean is, I don't mean the stiffness of the overall rim, but I just mean locally around here. Now, when you try and do that on the wind space rim, that feels quite stiff. When you do it on the ZIPP rim, I mean, it's difficult to convey this on video, but it doesn't feel anywhere near as stiff. And that's probably because the wind space rim has the hook, and that just locally increases the second moment of area, so it is less likely to bend. There are some other little features on here. So this little hump here sort of contains the tyre bead when you get it on before you inflate it. So you can pump that up and then it engages onto there. On the ZIPP wheel, you don't have that, but you've got this recess in the middle, which is required because the tyre needs to slot in, and then as you pressurise it, it pings out. The only thing holding the tyre in is friction. So you've got friction and the radial and axial constraints of the tyre itself. Now, I generally don't like putting theoretical nonsense onto my PowerPoint presentations because it devalues them somewhat. If you want like theoretical bollocks, look elsewhere. But in this case, I'm putting this here for completeness, so you understand the mechanism of what the tyre is doing from pressure terms, because we're not talking grip today, we're talking pressure terms and blowouts. If you were to take a tyre, you model it as what's known as a thin wall pressure vessel, and it is an approximation. So if you took a tyre, probably a tubular tyre, and then cut it in half, you'd see that, and you know, the valve might be here, valve, something like that, look, something like that. If you pump this up with pressure, what happens is the tube or tyre wants to expand. So it wants to expand radially. Okay, the thing that's stopping it expanding is the rubber. So the rubber expands a bit, but it's actually inducing what's known as a stress. So you generate a stress in the sidewall of the tube or the tyre. So that stress looks something like that. So there's the arrows to indicate the stress. It's a tensile stress. Because it's acting like around a circle, we call that a hoop. Hence this equation over here. And this kind of explains why, you know, as people have moved towards bigger diameter tyres, they've had to drop the pressures. So the stress in the sidewall or around, I mean, some people call it skin stress, but you know, aero don't usually use that term. It's usually hoop. So we've got pressure, then diameter, and then T is wall thickness. So literally what this says is if you keep the wall thickness the same, so if you took a Continental tyre, whether it's 23, 25, 28, if you look on the side of them, the pressure drops as you increase the D, and that's because of this. So there is a hoop stress limit in the tyre around the outside of it, in the sidewall or wall or the complete wall, and that's what they don't want to exceed. So if you do that, you will have to drop your tyre pressure, and that's kind of like one of the things that is against lower rolling resistance. So if you have a thinner tyre with the same wall thickness, you can go to a higher pressure. A higher pressure will generally make you faster. All these studies and things where they say, hey, a lower pressure is better for you, doesn't take into account that if it's on a smooth surface, the vibration losses are effectively nothing because it's smooth, and therefore you'd be better off at a higher pressure because you've got low rolling resistance. But anyway, that's the hoop stress. Now, we've also got, an axial component. So if I was to draw the tube out again, this time it's in 3D, so we'll put the pressure in again. What we've also got is, let's say we cut the tube there, and I'm going to draw the cut. So that's the cut, and we do this quite a lot in engineering. You cut the pressure vessel or cut the beam, whatever. You've also got a stress axially. So the best way to describe this is if you were to take an inner tube and then pump it up outside of the bike, outside of the wheel and the outside of the tyre, you'd find it would get longer. And that's because you've induced a stress in that direction. Okay, the formula for that, very similar to the hoop, is over here. So you've got pressure, diameter, that's just a constant 4, and then the wall thickness. So what that's really saying is the axial stress is half the hoop stress. Now, how do you apply that? Well, if this is the hooked wind space rim that I've chopped in half, I'm going to draw on the tyre. You can see why this is an approximation in a minute. So we've got a stress there, which is your strigma hoop, okay? And one of the laws of physics is the sum of forces must be 0, otherwise it's accelerating. So you basically, if it's not 0, you've had a blowout. So you've got like forces that way, so let's call it that way, because it wants to blow out. If you put pressure in here, the natural tendency is for this to expand. You've actually got a force going in there as well, but it's carbon, so it's much stiffer, so it doesn't expand. At this interface here, you've got to take all of that hoop stress somewhere, and that's what this hook does. So it's taking, you've got the tensile force or stress in the tyre going that way, and the balancing force is that way. Okay, it works quite effectively. So this bit is highly loaded, and that's where that comes. This is the hooked tyre. Now this works differently because we have no bead. So, sorry, we do have a bead, but we don't have a hook. So the bead of the tyre looks like that, but there's nothing physically to hold it on. So you draw the tyre on like that, you've put pressure in here, so what's holding it back? Well, you've got two things that are holding it back. The first and the most important are these two beads here and here. By law of geometry, the only way to get that to pop over is if it is longer than the circumference of the rim. That's why it's difficult to get them on in the first place, because of that nature. So you want it to be shorter than that, otherwise it'll blow off. So that's the first thing. The other thing is you've got friction. So if I zoomed in on that, and let's draw a copy here. So that's the corner of the tyre, sorry, corner of the rim, and this is the bead, and it goes off like that. So we already have a skin tension, or let's call it a hoop stress, going that way, and that has to be balanced by something. So we've got the tyre bead there. You've also got an element of friction in here. That friction is a function, F equals mu r, basically of your pressure, because the more pressure you have, the more that's ramming it into there, and the friction coefficient between, which is the mu value, between the carbon, if it's a carbon rim, I mean they all are these days, and the tyre, plus the effect of any sealant you have, because sealant acts like a lubricant. So that is, quite a reduction in friction by putting the lubricant in. Now, let me just rub this out. This is where the pitfalls start. This is where it could go wrong. So what happens if you fit a tyre that isn't quite right? And usually that means it's slightly undersized. So if we put one in there like that, what's going to happen? Right. Well, there's a few things that can happen. The biggest one is the force between the rim and the sidewall is not there, so you haven't got a very good seal. And that's actually a fairly easy thing because you're not riding along and you're not putting yourself in danger. That can just happen when you're putting the tyre onto the rim. So that's the first thing. If you have a situation where it's mounted, you could end up with the tyre bead sitting like that. So you've got this gap here, and then the tyre goes around to the other side. And then you've got, this is a bit of a dodgy place because pressure can get in behind here. Yeah, and you don't really want it to end up there because that will try and move the bead up. The other thing, which is, I guess, not ideal, is the shape of the tyre will change. So this, let's just do it on here. So, you know, people want aerodynamics. So if let's say a normal tyre looks like that, and then we put the slightly small tyre on, it might look like that. Because this is less of a, what do we call it? Not a hemisphere, less of a circle. This behaves more like a flat plate. So a flat plate, there's a reason why you try and avoid flat plates in pressure theory. It's because they're liable to rupture for various reasons. But mainly because on a flat plate, you basically got no tension. So, you know, you haven't got generated any hoop stress that way or that way. Metal is good in tension. So all that's trying to do is just push the whole thing out. So it'll try and push the tyre straight upwards. And that's another failure mode. You don't want that either. You've got all these failure modes that exist, and now the practical ones, so the ones that happen when you're riding. The P value, which is the pressure, can increase as you ride because the tyre gets hotter. So that PD over 2T, stress, that bit goes up. When that goes up, because it expands slightly, you get something called creep. The effective D also increases. So you've now got two terms and it's gone up. That can't happen in a clincher because the D term locally is constrained by the hook. So that's why that doesn't happen. The other problem is if you were to, I'm just drawing another example, hit something at very high speed. Let's say this is your wheel rim. So let's put the spokes in. And then I'm going to exaggerate this, but let's say you hit something at the bottom really fast and then the tyre would do that because there's obviously a size discrepancy. There's a fair chance you would blow the tyre off the rim because there's nothing controlling it, because it's reliant on geometry. And if you fill the tyre up with too little pressure, it can do that. If you put enough pressure in it, so it looks like that, that deflection down here is smaller. So all these people that were like whinging like bitches saying that I put my tyres up too high, it's because I want to avoid this. And even with a hooked rim, you can still have the same thing happen, but it's much less likely. And then the final one is lateral deflection. So if you've got a tyre that is, I wouldn't say overtly high pressurized, but this is exaggerated. If you go over something and then move the tyre that way, you've obviously put a load of side load on here, and then if that moves off the seat, then bump, you lose pressure. So there's multiple ways you can have a tyre failure with hookless that are significantly reduced by having hooked. Right, tidbits. Now, I've just alluded to this. Loads of people said, "Oh, you fucking pump your tyres up too high." Now, I'd rather pump them up too high and live with the vibration rather than end up, you know, in an ambulance on the way to casualty. And then, you know, people refer to this, the Silka tyre pressure calculator. I think the pressure calculations in there are way too low. I think you're liable to have an accident just by using them. Read that one. That's just everywhere you go. Compliance, compliance, less pressure, lower rolling resistance. Well, there we go. And then this. So in all of this, when I look back through history, and you know, one of my close colleagues, one of my friends of mine, he works for Michelin. He works in the AirX side of the business, but you know, he rides Continental and Michelin tyres. So you know, take from that what you will. He won't go near Pirelli ditch finders or Goodyears, or he really thinks Vittoria is shit. I mean, personally, I tend to use Continental on the road bike and Maxxis on the gravel bike, but they are, I would say, credible because you don't really hear about them having any problems. And from what else they do, you know, they're road tyres, air tyres for aircraft, they're not going to fuck around. Whereas the likes of, well, it's been proven, hasn't it? ZIPP, it was the one that Cycle Speed Tours blew up. Was it Extra Light? I've forgotten. You know, those wheel manufacturers, an absolute bunch of cowboys. I wouldn't go near them at all. And if you are going to get some wheels, I would go and buy some wheels from the Far East. Top of the list will be 9 Velo, and then probably Elite, Fast Sports, and Windspace. I don't know why you would want to bother with ZIPP and Envy. And that leads you to the next, you know, problem, let's say. When you go and buy hookless, you've now got to go and consult these charts, and there's a huge, you know, grey area where you could go and buy a tyre from some brand that's not listed in a ZIPP compatibility chart or whatever, and then you can fit them. Now, what you can kind of like clearly see is if you fit a tyre that has a bigger internal diameter than the wheel, you should generally be okay. But that doesn't always work because the 23mm ZIPP wheels require in Vittoria 26 wide. I'm not quite sure why that is, but there you go. And you know, that could just cause a problem in itself. Now, if you are looking to buy hookless, yeah, have another think and check the sidewall stiffness if you can. I mean, you know, you've just seen the video. It's difficult to describe, but when you try and you know, bend the wind space, it feels rigid as fuck. The ZIPP, in comparison, I mean, if you try and bend it that way, I mean, you can feel it flexing. And that's the second moment of area basic mechanics. Yeah, I've just said about that. Right, if you've got any questions or comments, remember to bang them in below. Please like and subscribe, and check out my website, hambini.com. That is the end of this show. If you did enjoy it, remember to smash that like button, and if you didn't, go screw yourself. And as always, keep banging your hairdresser.